4:32 a.m., the 14th of February, 1933. Cotton Club basement. 12 men step out of the shadows. Guns drawn. Safeties off. Their target sits calmly in a wooden chair, hands folded, showing no fear. Dutch Schultz had sent his absolute best. Tommy, the executioner, Torino, Vento Maranzano, Ispic Delaney. 9 more killers whose names even the police didn't know. Men who'd murdered senators, judges, rival bosses. Men who never missed. Men who never left witnesses. But what happened in that basement over the next 90 minutes didn't just shock these killers. It broke them. And the one man who survived. He crawled out carrying a message that would make Dutch Schultz fey the man who'd killed 40 people without blinking, go pale as death itself. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Dutch Schultz really was in 1933. This wasn't just another gangster. This was the most feared criminal in American history. A man who'd built an empire on pure terror. A man who thought he was untouchable. Dutch was born Arthur Flegenheimer in the Bronx. 1901, German, Jewish, immigrant family. Father abandoned them when Dutch was 6. By age 16, he'd killed his first man. Beat him to death with a lead pipe in broad daylight. Didn't run. Didn't hide. Just stood over the body and dared anyone to challenge him. Nobody did. When Prohibition began in 1920, Dutch saw opportunity. He didn't start small. He went straight for the throat. Within 6 months, the 3 biggest bootleggers in the Bronx were all dead. Not just dead, destroyed. Their families threatened. Their operations burned. Their men either joined Dutch or joined them in the grave. Dutch's method was simple but terrifyingly effective. Overwhelming violence. When the Torino brothers tried to move into his territory, Dutch didn't just kill them. He killed their entire crew, 14 men. Then he sent their heads to their widows with a note. This is what happens when you steal from Dutch Schultz. By 1925, Dutch controlled every drop of illegal alcohol from the Bronx to Manhattan. His profit, $50,000 weekly, in 1925 money. That is over $1 million today. Every single week, but money wasn't enough. He wanted fear. He wanted everyone in New York to know that Dutch Schultz was the king, and kings don't share their throne. His reputation grew with every killing. The Eastman gang tried to muscle in on his numbers racket. Dutch had them all shot during Sunday Mass inside the church. In front of their families, the message was clear: not even God could protect you from Dutch Schultz. The police couldn't touch him. Dutch owned half the cops in Manhattan. The other half were too scared to try. By 1930, Dutch was worth over $7 million. He had 300 men working for him. Men who'd kill for a nod from Dutch. Men who'd die before betraying him. But Dutch had a fatal flaw. He was absolutely paranoid. He trusted nobody, and that paranoia made him brutal beyond reason. One night in 1931, Dutch suspected his lieutenant Jimmy Morrison of skimming money. No proof. Just suspicion, so Dutch invited Jimmy to dinner. They talked. They laughed, and when Jimmy went to the bathroom, Dutch followed him and beat him to death with a wrench. Not because Jimmy had stolen Faye, because Dutch thought he might steal. By 1932, Dutch's own men were terrified of him. They'd seen too many loyal soldiers die for imagined betrayals. Dutch Schultz had become something worse than a criminal. He'd become a monster. That is when Dutch turned his attention to Harlem. Harlem in 1933 was different. This was a community of survivors, people who'd built something beautiful out of nothing. The numbers racket was their biggest business. Poor folks betting nickels that added up to millions. You could bet a penny and win $50 for people making $7 a week. That penny represented hope. Dutch looked at Harlem and saw opportunity. All that money, all that profit. And it was being run by black people who, in his racist mind, couldn't possibly be smart enough to protect it. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Harlem had protectors. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the Queen of Numbers, and her enforcer Faye, a quiet, intelligent, dangerously calm man named Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't like other muscle. He was educated, self-taught, in prison. Reading Shakespeare, philosophy, military strategy, he understood that respect in Harlem wasn't bought with fear. It was earned with loyalty, and he absolutely refused to bow to Dutch Schultz. January 1933, Dutch sent emissaries to Harlem. They sat down with Madame St. Clair at her club. The message was simple: work with Dutch, pay tribute, or get buried. Madame St. Clair looked at these white men sitting in her club and said 2 words: get out. The emissaries turned to Bumpy Johnson standing in the corner. You want to be smart about this, boy. Bumpy didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. That stare, the one that made hardened killers check their life insurance policies. The emissaries left, reported back to Dutch. And Dutch Schultz, who'd never been told no by anyone, certainly not by a black woman, and her enforcer made a decision that would haunt him forever. Burn it all down, Dutch told his men, starting with him. He didn't just want Bumpy dead. He wanted it to be a message, public, brutal, the kind of death that makes everyone else fall in line immediately. Dutch assembled his most lethal crew. Tommy, the executioner, had killed 16 men, always close range. Always looked them in the eye. Vento Maranzano specialized in torture. Icepick Delaney got his nickname from his weapon of choice. He could kill a man with a single thrust, leaving barely a mark. The other 9 were equally deadly, men who'd killed judges, cops, rival bosses, men who'd never failed a contract. Dutch's plan was perfect. Lure Bumpy to an isolated location, overwhelm him with numbers, kill him slowly, leave the body where every person in Harlem would see it. The 14th of February, 1933. Valentine's Day, Dutch had sources inside Harlem, paid informants who reported that Bumpy would be checking Madame Claire's counting house on Lenox Avenue at 4 a.m. alone, vulnerable except it wasn't a counting house. It was a trap. The Cotton Club basement was the real after-hours spot where Harlem's players came to drink, gamble, and settle scores. The basement had crates of liquor, poker tables, one exit, perfect for what Dutch had planned. At 3:30 a.m., Dutch's 12 men positioned themselves in the basement. Hidden behind crates, guns loaded, orders clear: make him suffer. At 4:32 a.m., footsteps on the stairs. Slow, steady, confident. Bumpy Johnson descended into that basement like he was walking into his own living room, navy blue suit perfectly tailored, white shirt. No tie. He never wore ties, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Even walking into what he knew was a trap, Bumpy Johnson looked like he owned the world. Tommy stepped out first, gun drawn, pointing at Bumpy's chest. Dutch sends his regards. The other 11 emerged from the shadows. 12 guns. 12 killers. 1 target. Bumpy looked around the room slowly, counting, calculating. Then he looked back at Tommy and said something that nobody expected. That all he sent. Tommy's confident smile faltered. This man was outnumbered 12-1, surrounded by the deadliest killers in New York, with no weapon visible, no backup, no way out. And he was asking if this was all Dutch could manage. You got about 5 seconds to beg, Tommy said, trying to regain control. Bumpy tilted his head slightly. You are making a mistake. What mistake? You are about to be dead. Bumpy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The mistake is thinking I came here alone. 12 guns stayed trained on him, but now there was doubt, hesitation. Tommy glanced at the stairs. Nothing. Looked at the other killers. They were scanning the room, looking for threats that weren't there. You are bluffing, Tommy said. Bumpy smiled for the first time that night. A cold, knowing smile, then shoot. That is when Tommy realized something chilling. In all his years of killing, he'd learned to read men's faces in their final moments: fear, panic, desperation. Bumpy Johnson's face showed none of that. It showed patience. Like he was waiting for something. Like everything was going exactly according to plan. Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger. Last chance. Bumpy moved. What happened next defied explanation. The survivor's testimony was confused, fragmented, traumatized. But this is what we know. Bumpy didn't go for a gun. He didn't dive for cover. He went for the light. One punch, the hanging bulb exploded. Complete darkness. Then chaos. Panicked gunshots. Men screaming, bodies hitting the floor. Tommy shouting orders that nobody could follow because nobody could see anything. In that darkness, Bumpy Johnson became something else. He knew that room, every crate, every table, every corner. He'd played poker there 100 times. Dutch's men didn't one by one. You could hear them going down. Not from gunshots. Bumpy wasn't wasting bullets. He was using their confusion, using their fear, using the fact that in their panic they were shooting each other. A scream, a body hitting concrete, another gunshot, another scream. Tommy tried to rally them. The stairs, get to the stairs. But Bumpy was already there. The violence lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours to the men trapped in that basement. Then silence. When someone finally opened the basement door from upstairs, here is what they found. 11 bodies. Not all dead, but all down. Broken bones. Gunshot wounds from friendly fire. Unconscious. Bleeding, destroyed. And one man sitting against the wall, hyperventilating, gun still in his shaking hands. Icepick Delaney. The only one still conscious. Bumpy Johnson was gone. Vanished like smoke. Icepick crawled up those stairs. 23 minutes. Every step was agony. Broken ribs. Maybe worse, but he had to deliver the message. He had to tell Dutch what happened. At 8:17 a.m., Icepick stumbled into Dutch's social club on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. Dutch was eating breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, reading the morning paper. He looked up, saw Icepick covered in blood, and went completely still. "Where are the others?" Dutch asked quietly. Icepick couldn't speak at first. Just shook his head. "Where are my men?" "Dead," Icepick whispered. "All of them." Dutch stood up slowly, the entire room, his lieutenants, his accountants, his bodyguards, everyone stopped and watched. "He what?" "He let me live," Icepick said. "He let me live to give you a message." Dutch's voice was ice. "What message?" Icepick reached into his jacket. Dutch's men reached for their guns, but Icepick pulled out a single playing card. The ace of spades covered in blood. He placed it on the table in front of Dutch. "He said to tell you, Harlem's not for sale. And if you send more men, send more cards. He is collecting a full deck." The silence in that room was absolute. These were men who'd seen everything: murder, torture, war. But they'd never seen their boss, Dutch Schultz. The most feared man in New York, receive a message that made him look afraid. Dutch stared at that bloody card for what felt like an eternity. His men waited for the explosion, waited for Dutch to unleash hell, to send 50 men to burn Harlem to the ground. Instead, Dutch picked up the card, studied it. Then, incredibly, he smiled. Not a happy smile, a defeated smile. "He has got balls," Dutch said quietly. "I'll give him that." "Boss," one of his lieutenants said carefully, "we can't let this stand." Dutch held up his hand. "You know what it costs to go to war with someone who is not afraid to die. Someone who is smarter than you, someone who has an entire neighborhood behind him." He shook his head slowly. "It costs everything, and for what?" "Numbers, money. There is easier money out there." Dutch dropped the card in his ashtray and lit it on fire. They watched it burn. "We're done in Harlem," Dutch said. "Let Bumpy Johnson have it." The decision shocked everyone in that room. Dutch Schultz, the man who'd gone to war with Lucky Luciano, who'd killed his own partners, who'd never backed down from a black man from Harlem. But Dutch understood something most gangsters never learned. Some battles can't be won. Not against men willing to die for their principles. Not against communities that protect their own. Not against someone who fights with intelligence instead of just brutality. Dutch Schultz lived for 2 more years after that night. He was killed in 1935 by Lucky Luciano's men in a New Jersey restaurant, shot multiple times while eating dinner. But that bloody ace of spades, Dutch kept it until the day he died. Not as a reminder of defeat, but as a lesson. A lesson about respect, about choosing your battles. About understanding that some men can't be intimidated because they have something worth fighting for. Bumpy Johnson became the undisputed king of Harlem after that night. He ruled for the next 35 years, protecting his neighborhood like his own family, not through indiscriminate violence, but through intelligence, strategy, and an unbreakable code. That basement was boarded up the next day. Nobody wanted to go down there. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of the night when 12 killers walked in, and only one walked out. The message delivered that morning changed everything. It established Bumpy Johnson as a legend. It marked the beginning of the end for Dutch Schultz's empire, and it proved something gangsters everywhere would remember. It doesn't matter how many guns you have. It doesn't matter how many men you hire. If you are fighting someone who has something worth dying for, someone who is smarter than you, someone who is already 3 moves ahead, you've already lost. That bloody card wasn't just a message from Bumpy Johnson to Dutch Schultz. It was a message to the entire underworld: respect isn't taken. It is earned, and some men, some communities, some principles are worth more than life itself.